Welcome back. What problem are you solving? Right? We've made it past the eclipse. We survived. Right? The world didn't end. Right? The birds didn't fall out of the sky. So we made it.
But the giraffes were running. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
So yeah, I actually went in the full path of totality. So that was cool. I did a road trip with the kids and had a great time. So
You were
there we go.
close. You were close enough, but
Close enough. All right.
By the way, John, I wanted to say before we get started, I thought it was really cool that you went and challenged the traditional notion of education with your kids because I saw that you're like, now is the time to pull the kids out. There's a different way that we can give them an experience, one that they'll never forget. Right. I mean, even Nathan, I'm sure, was like, what happened?
What's going on?
But that was very cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yep, trying to do something a little bit different, but science for the win. Boom. All right, and then before we get into our usual question of the day, I want to bring in our very special guest for this week's episode, which is Ash Maurya.
Hey!
Entrepreneur, best-selling author, all-around great guy.
And wait. And he's a hell of a barbecue guy, too.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
This from the picture.
Don't know what it tastes like, but it sure look good.
All right. So we'll lead with you, Ash, for the question of the week, which is always, what problem are you solving this week?
Problem solving. So I always get pulled into a bunch of different things, and this month I got hit by a question on innovation accounting, innovation metrics, but more from a rubric standpoint. Like, how do you actually score if you've got a bunch of different projects in the portfolio? How do you actually score them? And so I kind of took that on, and that's it's not a finished problem, but definitely a problem worthy of some brain cells there.
That's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if you publish anything about that. That's exciting. How about you, Adam? What problem are you solving this week?
Solving my son's 5th birthday party logistics. So I had to.
It's a big one.
All right, but going off of I always have to pick because I'm solving the same problem every ecosystem stuff, startup stuff. But I think talking about innovation accounting, quantifying the results of pain in problem discovery or customer development, whatever we'll see what we end up calling it at the end of today's show. But like
a pain meter, got it.
Yeah, how do you actually how do we think people are finally starting to listen to customers a little bit, but how do you quantify the pain to make better decisions?
Interesting. Ty, what problem are you solving this week?
So mine is as a result of setup discoveries. I spent 3 days last week at the Federal Lab Consortium National Convention, where I got to be the MC. It was very cool. I hurt my back on Monday, so I had to stand up for like almost 3 hours and read a teleprompter and make it fun and rah, rah, rah. But the problem I'm trying to solve, it's a huge problem. And it's one that entire systems in the government are trying to solve, and that's tech transfer. How do you get stuff out of the labs and into the hands of people to build businesses around? The U.S. government is not like the Chinese government where they're placing bets, but they're creating space for innovation to happen by doing basically a huge venture studio where it's a non-equity studio. They give you runway, they give you the help, trying to figure out, it's interesting, Ash, you talk about, the innovation accounting. They don't have that in the government. It's just like 100 in, 100 out. Like, who does that? It makes no sense. Everything must succeed. Who said? It's stupid.
Right.
And so they actually turn systems on its head so everything succeeds, and therefore nothing succeeds. And so I think what they're starting to your point, Adam, customer discovery in a way where they're saying, so what problem are we really solving for the customer? Where's the technology? Don't lead with the technology, but understand that the technology is there. So you discover what's really a viable option. And so I'm trying to do that in a very, very narrow space called the historically Black colleges and universities community, because there's attention and there's focus and there's huge amounts of talent that don't have access to this technology.
Mm-hmm. Nice. As for
me, I figured it out. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. And John,
are you my straight guy?
I'm your straight guy.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Ty. That's for me, and you've heard me vent in our private chat. The problem I'm solving this week is I'm helping an organization who's trying to build an innovation process and innovation structure, and I'm watching them build innovation theater. I'm watching them build the structure, the all the anti-patterns that we've learned through experience of what not to do. And so how do I insert myself without looking like the know-it-all, but to say, hey, just so you know, you're driving your car a little too fast and straight into this brick wall. And so, but sometimes you have to let the kid fall and scratch their knee as well to learn. So there's that fine balance of trying to give them a little bit of warning while also letting them learn their lessons along the way. So that's where I'm at.
Well, it's funny. That reminds me of that quote that I used to use in my slides scientists don't coddle ideas, they drive them into a brick wall. If their ideas sound, the pieces, what will be standing will be the pieces of the wall or something, or of the car. No, well, you know what I mean. Anyway,
I like it.
Driving fast towards the wall is better than driving slow towards,
or not at all,
towards the cliff. So we'll get to some of that, because Ty's been trying to bring up old school stuff before we get into Ty's been talking about going fast through the loops. It's all about the loops.
Oh, you're muted.
He's on mute. All right, let's get to that. We've prolonged this long enough.
Wait a minute. So one of the things we've been talking about is learning cycles, large development learning cycles, the economics of large development learning cycles versus small development learning cycles. Build, measure, learn. I know that you have a different construct around that thing, but if the economics can afford you multiple of these, why would you want to do this? And John and I spent 20 years supporting an organization that did these very large development cycles, and then wonder why nothing came out on the other end. Because never talked to anybody. Why would you want to do that? I have a set of requirements.
Yep. So I'm a big fan of yours, Ash, having read Running Lean, Scaling Lean, and one thing that we've been talking about offline is what was one of your Medium posts about the leaner canvas. Right, because canvases are great. We've all used them for the right reasons, but I love how you've kind of gotten to the essence of it. You got the essential oil out of the canvas. So talk to us, how did that come about, and why do you find that to be a powerful tool?
So so I guess when we look at the lean canvas, what's really are you guys still there?
Yeah, we're still here. We're just focused you.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that I didn't lose you all. But when we essentially look at the lean canvas, one of the kind of big boxes that stand out is the problem box, and so that was a theme that came up over and over again. I would read lots and lots of lean canvases, and that's where I gravitate all my attention. And usually we spend the most time talking about that first, and after we do that, just like little dominoes, all the other pieces start falling apart and the whole canvas has to be redone. So that was the first, you can say, triggering moment where I began to realize that problems kind of really important to get right at the outset. And then in some of the work that I did with larger companies, there was always the challenge of how do we fill a full lean canvas when the knowledge is distributed across multiple departments. So you may have an engineer or a designer. They can talk about solution, they can even talk about customers and their problems, but they have a black box around marketing, sales. They may not even know what the product is sold for. And so that was kind of the other thing. And so that was, in some ways, those two coming together was my spark for saying, let's just distill this down to the fundamentals. And I think there's a visual that's on the screen now. If we can talk about who is it for, and what's it for, and what problem are we really solving, those in my mind are the lowest common denominator kind of factors to get out of the way, and then everything else almost stems out from there.
So I love the meta nature. I always used to try to challenge me, what problem is this solving in this case? What problem? And I think you answered the problem that it solved. I thought it was interesting to hear you talk right away about almost two separate, I can visualize that enterprise team that already has a solution. There's an engineering team that it's at a corporation. We do this on the podcast sometimes, like what problem are you solving? And I'm thinking early stage startup. Ty's thinking of the HBCUs or some of the students, and John's talking about his engineering, and he's mad at inefficiencies, and we're all talking. It's like that, that slide with the triangle, the square, and the circle, where I'm glad we're all thinking about the same thing. Hopefully,
Right.
in post, John's going to throw that thing in, that slide in seamlessly. So, is it specifically for okay, that's what problem it's solving. And also, you talked about it was solving a problem for you and your coaching, and so is it for later stage startups and enterprise, or is it used differently? All right,
who would use this?
Yeah. Who's it for? Yeah, there you go.
Right. So I guess I'll first answer where you were going in the beginning, or where I thought you were going, is that what problem are you solving is a great first question. But really what I want to know is, why are you solving that problem? And that's what this aims to get at. So usually when people tell me what problem they're solving, when I stress that, I realize, or it quickly becomes apparent, that they are solving a problem to justify what you were saying, a solution that's already in their mind.
Yes.
So that's the hammer problem, where everything looks like a nail. And so that to me is not a good enough answer. Why? Correct. That's not why you should be solving this. And so this is where, over the years, I talk a lot about the innovator's bias, where innovators tend to unconsciously, prematurely fall in love with their solutions, and sometimes don't even know they're doing this. And so this canvas is a great kind of reminder to say, no, that's not good enough, because there's no solution in the leaner canvas. You cannot talk about your solution or justify it. I want you to prove to me that this problem is worth solving, and that's where I take the conversation next. So when I'm working with those corporate teams, it might be, oh, we are building X, to solve these problems. And then the next question is, why now? What evidence do we have that this is even a problem worth solving to start with?
All right, we'll get to this in a second.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to. That's my last one I'm going to use. But I think so. You mentioned if the problem is why, and you have one of the worst things is a solution. Solutioneering, or what are 5 of the other worst ones, or 5 other bad reasons why, or 5 other interesting ones, or 5 other common like long tail that you wouldn't know unless you were Ash or one of us that have seen this 1,000 times. What are bad whys, or interesting red herring whys?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I'll say that, I find that all ideas can start on any box on the canvas. So I've worked with many entrepreneurs who started with a solution and they went on to build something very successful. So it's not so much that one is right or wrong, or one is better than the other, but there are inherent biases that come in when we just go on faith for too long without seeking evidence. So to me, the origin story is very telling. So that's why, what I'm trying to do here with the why question is, tell me, how do you stumble into this problem? And if someone tells me a story of they were in the lab and they see these scientists invent this thing, or AI or whatever it is, and this is the next new big thing, and that's why they're doing it, I'm not going to say the idea will never work, but at least it gives me the context in which this idea was generated. So I'm more interested in the origin story. And so to answer your question more directly, the most common one is usually solution. Something happens in the world, technology, whatever, and people get enamored by it, and they're like, this is going to be the
Have you heard of AI? I think it's going to be this new thing that everyone's going to start using.
The next best thing since sliced bread. Exactly. And then every startup has to have an AI story after that, right? So that's the most common. The other ones I see are kind of variants of that. So this could be patents or some unfair advantage. It's a cornered resource. It could be the technology, but it could also be people. It could be access, access to government, access to customers. So that kind of cornered resource is what a lot of people sometimes overemphasize in their story. And then the other ones are just sometimes reading trends or opportunities. They'll look at behavioral things. People are more climate aware, so we should go this way, or people are not so much, we should go that way. So those types of things, kind of reading tea leaves. So those are maybe the top ones that I see.
You got me thinking. And I really like this idea of the origin story. One of the ways that I was, at least when John and I were working together, more specifically, it was like, what problem are you solving, for whom to do what, and how you know you've kind of gotten there, right? Those are the 4 questions. But I do like the why, and I'm not exactly sure where it comes in. The origin story, I think, is absolutely positive. So you laid out 3 conditions that kind of create this analogous urge in the founder. Hey, there's AI. Oh, well, we better jump on the ball. Or there's climate. Yeah. But it seems to me that that there might be a space in there, and I think it's going to where Adam was going. It's like, where is it? I understand where it's not, the 3 things that you laid out, but what is it in the origin story that makes you go, oh, they're actually onto something? And by the way, for those that are listening, Ash put out in like 2015 this article that I don't even know if I've even read the article, Ash. It's called "Love the Problem, Not the Solution." Right? I just love the title. I took it and I sent it all.
Would use that every day, nonstop, for about 3 years.
I had to, because it was so seminal to me. Look!
Wearing the shirt.
Well, that was prompted.
Yeah. Thank you. My royalty check will be in when. Oh, I'm sorry. And so, what is it in these conversations that make you go, they actually are onto something? With my students, I'm the entrepreneur residence at a local university, and I show them Clay Christensen's The Milkshake Problem, right? That video, because to me it was like, yeah, I solved your problem I thought was your problem about chunky, chewy, viscous, flavor, less flavor, and it still didn't change my expected outcome. And it wasn't until they did, I think, that what Adam has suggested, going out and talking to people, they're like, so what are you really trying to do? Oh, I'm bored and I don't want to eat a banana. And this gives me something to do. How do you identify, when you're working, that milkshake understanding of the problem?
Yeah, and actually, when you bring the milkshake example, it's almost like a magic trick, obvious in hindsight, but not so obvious if you were kind of doing that research. And that's how problem. So when I'm hearing the problem story, I want to find something in the story that's in the realm of an insight. And an insight, by definition, is something that most normal people don't see. And when we look at problems, as you said, there are many flavors to problems, but a lot of problems are either very big and obvious, and they're hard, they're wicked, and all these things. But the insight is, how might you either solve it, or how might you find a root cause to, like, what's the tipping point that's going to at least move one domino in the right direction. So that's what I'm really looking for, is when people just say, oh, I'm solving things for sales people because they want to sell more. That to me is an example of a very obvious, non-interesting problem. But if we can go down a few levels and talk about what they're really struggling with and what insight kind of comes out from that conversation or from that narrative, that's what I'm really looking for.
So how close is this to design thinking? Because this is where I'm going with this. There's a gentleman by the name of Hal Gregersen, MIT professor, that wrote a book called Questions Are the Answers. And he actually has people question storm. So you open the aperture by asking more investigative, more deconstructive kind of questions, right? So you're deconstructing the problem versus a brainstorming, which is kind of narrowing the aperture because you're trying to come down to a limited set of possibilities. And right. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're asking more questions than you're delivering answers, as you're trying to, like, so John and I, we had this thing where, that's the book. We had this idea where we would, in our training, we would go beyond the 5 whys. We'd ask people to construct their problem on a 3x3 sticky. So you can't write your entire problem, so you only have so much information that you can write on a sticky. We'd go through the thing. We'd say, great, remember that sticky you said was your problem? Deconstruct that by asking as many whys as you can of that problem. We would get to like 4 and they would go, I don't even know if this is a problem anymore because I can't think of anything else because I've stopped here. And you're asking me to go even further. They get to number 5, they go, is this even a problem? And so what I think is, to your point, you're just talking about a symptom. That's not a problem. And when they started to unpack it even more and start thinking about, who am I solving this problem for? They went, oh, that's not my problem. This is my, and it would rewrite it. And our metric was when they would talk to it, to the entire group, we say, what we do is read the first one and read your new insight. 8 times out of 10, you'd get people go, yep, I don't even know what you do, but that sounds like a big problem. It was really cool to see them do that kind of like mind shift.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm completely on board with that. I will just say, tactically though, when I work with, when I'm talking to customers don't like talking about problems. It makes them feel vulnerable. They have to open up. They have to know you, like you, and trust you. So those kind of things work when there's trust, or when you're in a setting where you can really kind of home in and say, let's get to root causes. And I think internally, like asking those questions, tell you that maybe there isn't as much clarity as we think. Yeah. But with customers, it's a slightly more kind of nuanced way of just understanding like where they struggle, like what are they trying to do, and why are they doing silly things. Like when, before we had ride sharing, we would book the taxi the night before and double check it 3 times before bed. We would wake up 2 hours earlier just in case the taxi would be late. We called the taxi company 5 times, and when it was 5 minutes late, everyone in the family would start getting nervous, right? All those are pet peeves and problems and workarounds. But if you had asked someone back then, what's wrong with taxis? Like, what are the problems? Let's do a 5 whys. It would kind of be, with the consumer, kind of rather weird and absurd. And you may not get to that. I'm not sure if you would or you wouldn't, but I think you get my point. So it's sometimes it's a bit more, as an interviewer, you are kind of looking for what's being said and done, and why are those things being said and done.
Yeah, there's an art in that. Exactly. That's why I'm a recovering engineer, because as my engineering brain taught me, what is wrong with the solution? So why can't? So you tell me how to fix it, instead of what else are you trying to do? What's your job to be done? What's the context, right? And that stuff was never taught in engineering school. So
yeah. So yeah. I was a closeted technical geek myself, where I would just. Yeah. I would literally go to customers and say, tell me, what do you want to build?
Fix this. Fix it.
Tell me your problem and I will build that. And that never worked, because they would always send me on those symptom level stuff. Yep. And I would build all kinds of things and they would never use it, because they never got to the root cause.
Mm-hmm. So this is interesting. So Ty mentioned build, measure, learn in the beginning. And then you mentioned, like, I'm not going to, like, this time to evidence. I don't know exactly what you said, the word evidence. And I think it was like, I don't just trust it just because they have a good idea or a bad idea. I think we all agree, and I want to unpack a little bit on sort of what the economics of this smaller learning loop is. But I also, in the same conversation, I think the technique of getting the evidence is something we should talk about. Like, I was going to challenge you for a second, where it was like, sometimes I'll teach people, like, yeah, people love to complain. People love talking about their problems. And I was thinking to myself, well, he's right. First of all, it depends on who, like, and I agree with you, trust, and all the list you mentioned. Like, it depends on who, depends on the circumstance, and it depends on the type of problem. Is it something that's super personal, or is it something that they love to complain about? But then when I was thinking of one thing I was going to challenge you with, I was like, well, what about the technique, right? So a customer immersion, where I was just embedded with someone the night before. This might not sound practical, but I would in fact get the same types of insights from them if I use that technique, if I was able to. And now I agree, it doesn't solve the trust problem, and we're not sleeping in strangers' homes the night before a trip. So how do you differentiate? Well, first of all, how do you define the cycle? So what are you doing? And this is probably a good time to start going through the leaner canvas, because we're all very curious to be like, what do you get, whether it's an enterprise team or a startup, what are you doing? So you get the why, and then you're going through some series. At some point you need evidence, and you might be wrong. Like, you might be saying, oh, this is a solution looking for a problem. But if they have evidence and they're going through the canvas, so that's one question. The other question is, like, where does the difference between the process and the actual technique to get the evidence in your mind? Like, where design thinking is like, well, I wouldn't use that technique, but if you can get that evidence to get through the cycle, it counts.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of design thinking. The only thing I would say that I kind of layer on in the initial discovery is a filter or several filters, but one of the filters is a viability filter, is that we are looking for problems, but we're also looking for, very importantly, problems worth solving that have a particular price tag attached to them so we can make our business model work. And so in the work that we teach, we actually do some level of high level viability testing. And these are like simple things like, if I'm trying to build a $10 million business, I need 1,000 people paying me so much money, otherwise this will never work.
Yeah,
and if I know that I need 1,000 people paying me so much money, when I do my customer discovery, I'm looking for $1,000 a month problems or $10,000 a month problems, not just any problem, for that matter.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I tend to have the viability filter as a back of my mind thing. I've never really thought of it as an explicit checklist item as we go through that.
I'd almost say, like, as a serial entrepreneur now, I mean, and this is again a maturity cycle, but stakeholders think this way. And as a more serial entrepreneur, I can spend 3 years on anything. Like, there's so many problems.
Of course, right.
And good ideas will take 3 years or longer just to get to knowing if it's going to really work or not. And so as I've gotten older, I realized that viability is the only filter I should apply up front. And the question I ask myself is, if I'm going to invest 3 years of my time, which is an asset I'm never going to get back, never ever, is it worth doing?
And I like, you've written a lot on that hockey stick and where to put those metrics. So definitely check out some of Ash's back catalog for a lot of content about that.
So I want to push back on this idea of viability, because, and I do believe it. Is it worth my time? Is it worth me throwing years of my life against this thing? In terms of viability, if I were a startup, how would you recommend, as my coach, founder, at what point do I go, this is dumb? Because I have I just need to just cut my losses, right? I have a guy that I've been working with that had a really good, at least he thought he had an idea. And I was like, dude, this is not going to work. You're building something you shouldn't be building. You have this whole other, no, I know what I'm doing. And now 2 years later, he's like, gotta go.
Yeah.
I'm kicking the can down the road. I've put too much time and effort. How would you advise somebody at some point, knowing that viability is one of your key ingoing, is it worth your time? What would you say to them?
So it starts by first telling them, let's forget about your idea for now. Like, why are you doing this? And again, there are many flavors to startup success today. Like, back in the day, it was everyone aiming for 100 million in 5 years. That was like your VC story. Today, there are many, many more paths. I sometimes call there like 4 games to winning. You could just want to quit your day job and build a $100,000 a year business, give or take a few, thousand here and there. And that's pretty comfortable. I quit my day job. I'm now a solopreneur. Or you could want to build the next unicorn. And in between them, there are like 3 or 4 levels in between. So my first question to that entrepreneur is, which game are you playing? Are you a level 1 or a level 4 type of a success story? Let's forget about your idea for the time being. And if you don't know the answer, go and think about it over a weekend. If you've got co-founders, talk amongst yourselves, because you don't want 6 months down the road someone getting into a fight because they were building a rocket ship and you just wanted to build a nice, comfortable lifestyle business, right? So that to me is step 1. And then once we have clarity on that, and ambition is somewhat ballparked, now let's take the idea that you have, your most current, most promising idea, and see, can it in any sense of reality achieve that goal? And more often than not, unfortunate as it is, many ideas fail the viability test in the first pass. We can, of course, then start asking, how do we raise prices, or how do we go after a bigger market, or things of that nature. But remember, the goal is non-negotiable. You're going to spend 3 years of your life, and that I like to call it a minimum success criteria. What is the smallest outcome that would be worthwhile for you? Not because where people get stuck also is they start saying, oh, I take a unicorn. I'm like, what if it was not a unicorn, but a $10 million business? They'll take that too. What if it was a $1 million business? That's where people start saying, oh, that may be too small. So that's how I try to gauge what their minimum is, and we work off that.
I like that, because that reminds me early on, kind of doing the innovation coaching. there was the debate of, should you fill out an entire business model canvas first, right? Or do you just focus on solving a problem and doing value proposition? And, there was different schools of thought, but then sometimes it does help to say, even if you have a really good solution, is it scalable, right? Can you sustain it, right? You have those things that maybe let's at least write it down real quick on the back of a napkin and just check before we go any further. And I think it's a good sanity check. So
yeah,
I like
even if it just gives you, so I mean, we're talking about problem, but even if it just gives you that sizing constraint of a problem,
right.
I have to get 1,000 people paying me $1,000 a year. Now, when I go looking, I'm not going to be talking to college students, so they're not going to pay me $1,000 a year for anything.
Right.
I'll start focusing my attention on segments that could potentially, pay me that kind of money.
It's interesting because when I hear viability, you know where I'm going with this. It's the David Bland, who hopefully we'll have on here. It's the feasible, viable, desirable, this triumvirate. And it's interesting because I was listening to you, and I'm trying to disabuse myself of that kind of viability. I think they're clear, but I think there's a different kind of viability that you're testing up front versus the bottom of the business model canvas, cost and value. Where's that? Is it upside down or not? It feels very different, and I think it's important.
I would say it's the same, but to me, there are stages in which there is just like high definition and low definition. So when I'm looking at viability in the beginning, so I'll just maybe take your example. I could build a unit economics, viable business where I'm profitable, but if my goal was to get to $10 million of annual recurring revenue, but I'm profitable and only get to 2, then I'm not still viable. I've lost the big game. So to me, as I said, there's high definition and low definition. To me, the first question is, what is that recurring revenue that the company is even trying to strive for? Minimum. Then we will, over time, start asking the profitability, cost structure, like all those other aspects of viability, pricing.
So here's where it gets interesting to me. I actually have a certification in executive coaching, and I got it because I wanted to work with founders. Because in my certification is more dynamic, psychodynamic than it is, than just like life coaching and business coaching, which not interested in one and don't know anything about the other necessarily. But what you've articulated for me is something that I do kind of naturally. It was like, why are you even in this? What do you want to get out of this? And I think that's your notion of low. And I think anybody that's listening to us online or recommends this eventually to go in and say, is it even worth? Is what I'm building even close to where I think I'd want to go? And asking those very solid kind of life affirming or life questioning questions. And it ain't, because what I think the reason why I was taking is it's not about the money. It's about where you want to be.
What do you want to be when you grow up, Ty?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that's like on that startup founder level, but I've done the same thing in like corporate workshops, where in a workshop we've killed like 10 ideas after like this exercise.
Absolutely.
Put a stakeholder on the spot and I say, what is your minimum success criteria? 3 years from now, how much revenue or market share or what metric are you going to use to say this is a go or no go? They put that on the table. The next thing you know, these ideas are like falling on their heads, and the folks are like very uncomfortable in their chairs. I'm like, you'd rather know that now than 3 years from now when your project's being next.
Well, and I'm sorry, Jad, because what I'll tell you, and I'll let you go, Adam. Yeah, just pound, whatever. Is that this feels very strategy, right? So you have Roger Martin, the 5 questions of strategy. Very first one is, what does winning look like? In our experience, John, and I'm sure that you all have it, but John, in our experience, like, we got to play 70 people. If that's your winning, that's your definition of winning, I'm walking out the door, because I will never get anywhere else with you. And I think that what you're asking is like, in 3 years, what does winning look? I mean, you've articulated very well, but like, what is that thing that your North Star? I know we used to work in, I currently working in, like, what's the North Star? Better metrics. That ain't, I don't even know what that means. Because tomorrow you say that ain't the right metric, and I'm still as lost as I was. Yeah. Exactly. Sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
Adam, go ahead.
All right, couple things. Yes, I can see that working very well in a corporate environment. I'm just wondering what you do because I have a couple founders that I work. It's like they don't care about viability. They'll figure it out, and they really, either it's a social impact idea, or, you know, with the college student example, it's like, well, I need college students in order to prove the model, which is then a beachhead. You know, they kind of do what's the Rube Goldberg kind of business model, which I agree that that's not the best way to do it, but that in reality, that's what a lot of first-time entrepreneurs are doing. So what would you say to them, or would you just force it, like, you have to answer this viability question, otherwise,
No.
you know, I can't?
So that's where like coaching comes in. So like social impact, let's start with that one. Impact is not free. It costs money to have that impact. And so even if you were a not-for-profit, let's figure out, like, if you want to plant 1 million trees to save the forests, like how much would each tree planting cost? How many people would you need? We can come up with a very ballpark. And so so the first step is, you know, starting with like, what might it even cost if you're a not-for-profit to have this impact? And then the next question is, let's ballpark. We don't need 3-digit precision. Like, are we talking $100 million or $10 million or $1,000, right? So we start there, and that's good enough to start doing this kind of thinking. With the folks who haven't figured it out, this is where it's a bit longer winded, but that's where it's more of a, like, why are you doing this? If you're trying to get chops in entrepreneurship, you know, then start with an easier thing. Let's if you're a college student, let's build a, you know, $100,000 or $500,000 company to start with, or $1 million ARR type company, and that's going to give you like your mini MBA for the next thing, right? So this is again where I'll kind of talk them down, and not if they have grand illusions of unicorn, then we might do some numbers and say, look, unicorn building is not all that common for a reason, and here's why. So maybe do this other thing. So that's where, like, you almost have to read the ambition. But I'll mention that in these conversations, I try to be very Socratic in the approach. So it's not me telling you what's right or wrong, but rather you tell me what you want to do. And if you don't know, I'll ask you a few questions, like, how big of a company do you want? You know, how much vacation do you want to take? Do you want a boss? Do you want a VC? You know, do you want these things? And that's how we pigeonhole people into, well, if you want these types of things, this is this kind of a company.
So I won't do a tag and say, you know, that I didn't read the blog post of what problem, or fall in love with the problem, but I haven't read all of your slides. Do you have a test like that? Do you have an assessment? Because I think that's really interesting, the way you frame it like that. Do you have is that behind a wall somewhere, or is that?
So I know before, I mean, it's not a plug, but I'll say that last few years I've been working on
plug away.
Well, but I've been working on, you know, how do we get to coach teams in this manner, in this Socratic type approach? And so I've written Running Lean, which we've talked about, Scaling Lean. And so I am working on a third book, which is more around coaching lean. And it is kind of some best practices for how to ask those kinds of questions, which I've kind of gleaned, you know, stumbled into in many cases over the years. And it's almost acting a bit more like a therapist to try to understand, like, what is this other person trying to do? And when I go back to what I said before, is there's never it's an infinite game. Entrepreneurship is an infinite game story. There's not a one path to win. We can even take AI, and you can have two seemingly competitive solutions, but they can both coexist. So to me, it's like, try to understand, what is this founding team trying to do, and what's winning for them relative to what they're trying to do. And then that's kind of where the rest of the conversation then goes after that. So that's what I'm trying to coax out in that first conversation. And that's the origin story. That's you can say at the top of the hill, what's their desired outcome? You know, what are they trying to achieve after? And I like to use 3 years, because 3 years is a good time box for product market fit. So when we start talking 5, 7, 10 years, people again glaze. They can't think that far. But everyone can think about 3 years. You know, year 1, I'm going to build a product. Year 2, I'm going to get some customers. Year 3, I'm going to grow and scale. Okay, tell me, when you're growing and scaling, how big is that company? Right. So that's where I'll start.
But what's amazing to me is that it's so very simple is not the right term, but that's the only term that comes to mind. But it's really like just these simple interrogative kinds of propositions that you call it Socratic. You know, how do you like, so what is it that you want to do? You know, one of the questions that I literally use with folks is, so what must be true? I go, they're like, I'm going to assume that everything you say is correct. Cool. That you're going to grow 100. what must be true? Well, I have this and I need this and that. Of those 5 things, how many do you know tomorrow you have? Well, I don't. So what must you do in order to prove that that thing is right? Because this, and so you kind of backward assess, or you find these blockers and enablers block. There's actually a strategic methodology that talks about the backcasting, they call it, that you backcast into where you want to be. So if you say you want this, so what's getting in the way? Well, I got to have this. Cool. Well, if you have that, what does that resolve?
You have reverse engineer a schedule, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I really, really like what you've articulated is what seems like a very, I'm not saying that it's easy to do, but a very simple method.
No, but isn't simple the ultimate sophistication? Isn't that like I don't know if it's don't know.
It's a truism.
Yeah, but I was just going to say that. But in many ways, like all the canvases and this kind of thinking is all about deconstruction. So we want to take complex ideas, deconstruct it, and exactly then stack it up, bottoms up with first principles to say what must be true for this business model to work. And wherever it fails the first, that ends up being your riskiest assumption.
I love it.
Just quickly, I think just working backwards, I think Amazon, for better or for worse, should get some credit. Do you use the press release and start with the end in mind? Kind of maybe use the
Amazon press release.
Yeah, I think it is a pretty effective, like having people actually write the headline, and like I found that it is, regardless of your opinion of the company itself, is a pretty effective tool of getting people to action, because we all know this stuff. But the coaching part is hard, and I found that specific activity gets people motivated to be like, all right, it really is going to, and using that same time frame that you're talking about, like it really, I've seen that click. Have you used it? Do you like it? Is it the same thing? And also, while I'm talking, as I'm going back on mute, see, we got 3 minutes left. We've hardly gotten to it. We have a hard stop at 45. Can we go 5 extra? What's everyone's appetite? We haven't even gotten to the canvas, to the leaner canvas yet. All right. What about the press release? What do you think?
I'm a huge fan of that. So it's, again, that kind of future visioning and then working backwards. And then there's another technique, and I'm not sure if it's Gary Keller, and maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of the pre-mortem, I don't know if any of you know.
Love pre-mortems.
Yeah, but the whole setting there is we have just come in and this project has failed. Let's come up with all, like why it failed. And so it's a great way of admitting that we have failed and then looking at, what are rational explanations for why that is. And that's a great way of, again, surfacing some of those things that are in the back of people's minds for things that could go bad, but we're now bringing it all out and talking about it more openly.
All right. How about this? How about we walk through the leaner canvas real quick, get your hot take on that, talk a little bit about AI, and then we'll wrap it up. How's that sound?
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right. So walk us through why this is successful.
Sure. And I can see you have some numberings here. So I'll say that, to me, like when I'm initially having people fill out the canvas, my advice to them is fill it in any order. And a lot of people will, depending on the origin story, will start in different places. But this ordering that you're seeing here is what I use when I'm starting to stress test the idea. So really what I'm asking them is, tell me, if we start with number 1, like who is this idea for? And more specifically, when we get to 2, tell me what that beachhead segment is. Like who are your above average early adopters or customers? And that's who we need to focus in. Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm,
right?
Bell curve. So tell me like who they are. And I'll come back to like the triggering events, but let's just first go through the 1, 2, 3, 4. So kind of what's the addressable market? Who is this for? And then we move on to the right. And this is where there's a slight flip. One of the things that I see people stumble with is they'll make up problems, as I said, to justify their solution. And one of the things I want them to do with the leaner canvas is tell me, why does your solution need to exist in light of what exists today? So the existing alternative box is, how are people currently doing the thing that you are aiming to do, the job to be done? So what's the current alternative? What's the current solution? And why is that broken? So if I can get 1, 2, 3, 4, like even if they start telling me here's who is it for. They currently have this job to be done. They use these products. When they have to go to the airport, they are hiring taxis, but taxis are broken because you've got to do all the things I said. It's like you wake up 2 hours earlier, taxis are late. You never know if they're going to show up on time. And so we built this app where you can see taxis in real time and order online. And that's kind of the initial pass through this.
Where does the loop happen? So if they don't know, if they just think taxis are broken, but they haven't, they haven't had the personal experience. Like, I understand the origin story starts with a why, but the evidence also eventually you have to get out of the building, not to just go to Steve, but eventually you have to get out of the building. So I think this is what we spent the hour. This is what I was hoping John would give me an extension for on this. He's a tough grader. So yes, you're stress testing the customer. I read your piece also recently on getting too granular with the early adopter, but it sounds like we don't have time for that. So we'll save it for later. But if between what do your early adopters use? Fine. I think that's an answerable question. How do you refine, like, what's broken? What are you observing? Where are you gathering evidence?
Yeah.
What does that cycle look like?
So again, it's a bit more follow-up. So when we look at the evidence strength, like I've come up and I'm talking about the rubric early on, but one of the rubrics I use is 0. If we were to score, like if we were on a scale of 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, the lowest common thing would be a leap of faith. So if someone is telling me all these things, I'm like, how do you know these things? And they can't like point to even a friend or someone who has had a problem with the taxi, then to me that's a leap of faith. Right. So we first in this round, we're trying to gauge, tell me the story. And first I want to understand the story. Like if you tell me you want to build this because AI is great, that to me is not, like that has like a -1. That's not even like a 0.
Right.
But if you tell me that you're building AI because copywriters struggle with writing good copy and AI could help them, okay, I can there's a leap of faith I can take with you there that this could be good. Now tell me, what evidence do we have that copywriters really struggle with writing good copy? So this is where we go from a leap of faith to observations. So maybe you have customers or you've talked to people and you've got like handfuls, like less than 10 people that have come to you and said, I struggle with this kind of thing. So tell me like where you're getting this from. The next thing might be doing some kind of a discovery experiment, like customer interviews, where you've gone out and talked to copywriters and you've seen them struggle with the kinds of things. And this is where the problems is no longer copywriting is hard. It is these specific things about copywriting is hard. So that specificity is what I'm kind of using in the gauge of like, how do you know these things to be true? And then there could be more qualitative testing. Maybe I work with teams all the time who've already built a product, or they've built an MVP, and maybe it's in there and they've got some people using it. And then tell me what your customers are saying. Now, is this handful of people, do you have like 100 people, but only 5 people are using it? And are those 5 people saying something that is outlier, or is it? So this is where we start like gauging the evidence strength as a next pass. But my first pass is tell me a story, and then I'll ask the evidence strength question.
And as simple as this I agree. This is the maybe leanest canvas on earth. Everyone that we talk to has their value, but this is probably the leanest canvas. It's not the canvas's fault, but people sometimes still struggle. Like, what do I actually fill in if they're not sitting with you? In your example of getting to the airport is hard versus all of those things that they're doing, whether I can prove them or not, I think that's a good segment. But are you putting getting to the airport is hard in number 3? I know the order doesn't matter. And some of those sort of symptoms and what they're doing and why it's hard in 4, or how do you physically fill that out?
So let's walk through that with a live example. So let's say, I'll kind of just use like the Uber story, but I'll use it more from like business travel. So let's say, I'm a business traveler and I've experienced going to the taxi. And so this could be a scratch your own itch type of a thing. And so my first pass through this would be big customer segment are people who hire taxis. The early adopters might be these business travelers who are going on like weekly trips and they've got early morning flights and they've got to make it. And it's, otherwise there's a bunch of stuff at stake. So that would be my early adopters. Existing alternatives, some of them drive their own cars to park, but maybe a majority of them just take kind of black car services or taxis. So that's where we're listing the existing alternatives. Then I get to problems. And so instead of asking what problems does ride sharing kind of solve, because that's the idea in my head, I'm going to ask a different question, which is, why are taxis so problematic? And this is where I start going through kind of you can say it's a level of like deep why, 5 why type questioning. And so initially I might just list out from my own experiences what that might be. And that's where like the evidence strength comes in, because many times by the time people are filling their initial canvases, they've already been immersed in the problem in some way. It could be a scratch or an itch. It could be that they had someone come and tell them they struggle with this, and after the fifth story, they're like, okay, I'm going to do something about this, and that they use that in their evidence. So that's what I want to get, is where do you know and how specific is that problem? But if it were a good tell would be something like taxis are just hard. When someone just says taxis are just problems or they're painful, that's too high level.
Tell me more. Go deeper. Exactly.
And then how do you know this to be true?
Yeah, Ty, I'm envisioning this loop of just this, bringing from the generic to the granular.
It's funny that you would mention, as you said, a therapist, because that's what a therapist does. And so my orientation to executive coaching is that Socratic, is that understanding. I've only been to London once, but the space in between, in the tube between the deck and the car is the gap. And so there's two things that we say: you either mine the gap, M-I-N-E, pay attention to it, or you mind the gap. Right? What goes in between? What is that in between space, that interstitial space? What lies beneath, and understanding and unpacking that from a therapeutic standpoint, yes. But I think what you're suggesting is that there's another layer from a business standpoint. I don't want to go as deep as a business therapist, but like, okay, I literally will say I don't understand what you're talking about. That makes no sense to me. And I can say that with the people that I work with because they trust me. But I think it gets to your point of like, cool. And what else? Something in you clicked inside your head as the person's trying to solve this problem that made you go, that you just didn't see it, but you don't have the tools like Ash is offering up to go, this is what I can't, you're helping me articulate what I'm sensing. It's here, but I don't have it here. And I really appreciate what you're saying. Right. And I think it's an important piece of work.
And I'll add that we all experience our zebras, zero evidence, but really arrogant folks. So in those scenarios, so in those scenarios, it's kind of a different tact. So if someone says, yes, this problem is high level, but I know this to be true because it is true, and the only way that we'll know it is after I build my thing. This is where what I'm aiming to do there is something very different. So I call it judo versus sumo. If you get in front of someone like that, you're just going to get run down. Right. We have to get them off balance. And so there I will actually pivot the conversation and talk more about, so what can we do to get your idea out there? Like we want this, we want a landing page, or we want like a demo, or we want like a teaser page where people can come in and sign up. So what can we put on there? Like your stuff is so amazing and so great, but what's the value proposition? Like what can we put out there, or what demo can we go give? And I'll recruit them to help me build that. And one of two things will happen. Either they were onto something really big and I'll be like, yeah, you were good and let's just keep going faster, or they're going to fall flat on their face. And that's the judo analogy.
Yeah.
And when they're off balance, their knee. Yeah, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, and it becomes their problem. Yep. So that's usually
so one thing. So thank you for walking through that canvas with us. But I did want to talk about the AI issue as well, because I find it interesting to see people in the agile and in the lean startup space really struggle with this solution, looking for a problem, right? And how can, because again, it's the new buzzword. It's definitely at the peak of the hype cycle right now. How do we, as lean coaches, help?
Yeah.
With that in the AI arena? I'll leave it wide open.
Sure. So I think I was starting to talk about the innovator's gift by first talking about the innovator's bias. So the innovator's bias is where people will look at something like AI and say it's going to be the next big thing. And sure, that's true. But the innovator's gift is flipping that around and saying, what did people do before AI and what are we replacing? And so it's a bit of like jobs to be done. And it's the idea here is that there is no such thing as a new problem. We are really always solving existing problems that are being thrown out as byproducts of kind of existing alternatives, existing solutions. Like in my copywriting example, if we can home this into AI is for copywriters, then let's ask, what's broken in their job today? Like, what are they trying to do that your AI will be better? What are they currently, which tools are they using? And then why is that falling short? Can you now, and this is where we start getting into UVP type thinking or unique value proposition. Can you tell me that AI is going to be 3 to 10 times better than their current way of copywriting? And if the answer is, I'm not so sure, then again, just from innovation theory, we know that incrementally better doesn't cause people to get excited. You have to be significantly better.
Yeah, that's like Elon Musk has said that, for Tesla autonomous cars, they have to be 10 times safer than a human before we'll start taking it seriously, even though it's already saving lives. It's last time I checked, it's 1.7 times safer, number of accidents and number of fatalities wise, but yet we as humans, that switching cost, that trigger, it's going to take a little bit longer. Yeah, good catch.
Exactly. And then so once we throw the innovator gift out there, whether it's instead of using AI, which is something they're in love with, I'll say, let's pick something like fire. Let's pick like fire or the internet, or pick some other thing like the wheel. And we can, again, apply this mental exercise. What came before the wheel?
Good. I like that.
For transportation or construction, what came before fire? It could have been cooking, could have been warmth. What did people do before that? So you can apply it in any technology, and that's the way you get.
It takes the shiny object away. I like that.
And Lord knows we've been in some spaces where bright shiny object is like the rule of the day, and they change. Have you ever seen The Wiz? The color of the day is green. The color of the day is purple. Yeah. Oh God. Yep.
All right. Well, that's super awesome. Let's start wrapping up, and I'll lead with Ash. Where can we find your work, your stuff? What are you doing? Anything else you want to plug?
Plug.
Well, so I would say a lot of my work is on like 2 websites now. So Lean Foundry is where I write. That's where I kind of think up new stuff. So anything on framework and tools, kind of leanfoundry.com is where you'll find that. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to give me a follow or connect with me there. And then LeanStack is kind of more the coaching side of things. So the last 5 years have been kind of transitioning from trying to get some of these core ideas down in a framework sense, and now getting other people to teach and practice this, and that's what LeanStack is all about. So that's the 2 places you can find me.
Love it. Awesome. And good luck on the lean coaching.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Can't wait to read it. Awesome. Ty, Adam, now's your time to jump in. Any final thoughts?
Adam, go. I have one, but you go first, buddy.
Well, that was nice of you, Ty.
Yeah, Adam's not.
Was it?
I think it was too short a time for Adam.
2 more hours, and I think we can fit it in.
I want to be like, I want to tell John's audience, welcome. This was part 1. We'll be back, and everyone take a 5-minute break, and then
take a breath.
But he doesn't like when I mess with the algorithm. Yeah, just all right. I'm passing it back to Ty.
You happy? You good?
So,
well,
Ash,
no, but I got too much.
So, first of all, Ash, thank you. I mean, this has been a real pleasure. I had an opportunity to take a class with you about 6 or 7 years ago. I learned a lot. Took a lot. I think that was like one of the first times when people had cell phones. You start taking, in the world we lived in, you couldn't can't get punched in the face. You brought a cell phone in, so I could take all these cell phone pictures of all this stuff, and I learned a lot. And I appreciate the effort that you put into your work, and I appreciate tonight that you took the time to come on and to sit with us and talk about this idea of the leaner canvas, which is a way that I think. Only now I have an actual functional tool to get people, particularly the young people that I work with, because I think it's interesting, unlike corporations that are
9
like
boxes,
it's too
many.
Yeah.
I can't do 9. Can I do 4? Can you just give me 4 boxes?
That's it. But if we can train these students using a very, very straightforward document or canvas like this tool, it'll keep them from running off with ideas that they blow a lot of time and money and effort. I mean, I have a young man that I've been working with who actually interviewed him like in a pre-broadcast way. I mean, I had to get him he was selling t-shirts. I mean, he knew he had the flyest, dopest t-shirts out there. And I was like, how much of that have you sold? Well, I don't. So I just keep making sure I buy the right stack. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? To now where he actually he has two companies and they're both on the way because he's been able to kind of think about what problem he's really starting to solve and who he could go after and solve these problems and being really clear on not just a bunch of stuff. I'm the best, best t-shirts on campus, but like, no, I have a brand and I'm trying to solve the brand problem versus the t-shirt problem. It is really done well. So thank you, my man. Appreciate you.
All right, I guess I'll wrap things up to say again.
No, I'm going back. Film is free. You guys, sorry.
Oh, you're cutting out, Adam.
Well, because Ty inspired me from the 9, both of you, like the 9 box, and I mentioned before, like the leaner canvas and the leanest canvas. And I think, have you ever seen was it something about Mary 6-minute abs?
Yeah. No.
So, yeah, you can't
you can't get a workout in 6 minutes.
So I can't resist. So going from 4 bucks, like I know you have a reason. You have a reason. You have among the best reasons for everything. Why do we need the customer? If I go straight to early adopters, and I'm always trying to get people away from the customer segment, and it's always too broad. Why do we need that? Why can't we go 6-minute abs on the leanest canvas and call it a day? And we promise the world no more. We won't try to make simplicity into nothing. But why is that there? And then I'll stop talking.
Sure.
Good question.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I think it's a like the reason I left it in there. So I'm all for getting to product market fit with your early adopters, and that's like a whole other kind of topic on how do you size the two things. But for some of the teams that I work with, they still have to tell an investor story afterwards, and so there you've got this tension of I have to talk about this really big idea and then get razor focused on something that's not too small, and so that's the contrast you need, which is. If you just go and say early adopters, people will say, oh, that's not big enough. But you've got to kind of show that contrast. So that's my answer to that is like showing the big addressable and then the razor focus. This is what we're doing now kind of thing.
And it's great. And I didn't say there's 100 corps that I've seen with that I should have been prepared for where they shut it down prematurely. Because, yes, they got what they wished for. They actually proved it in the early adopters, but it's not big enough, and we're cutting it and have fun.
But I will throw that open challenge is that I intentionally caught there was the lean canvas, a leaner canvas. Someone out there, if they can come up with the leanest canvas, it's up for the canvas.
Solve problem. There you go. Awesome. Okay, now I'm going to say thank you again for hopping on. It's been a pleasure. Like one day meet you in person, and we'll have all these conversations over a nice beverage. So enjoyed your time. And let's see you next time. All right. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.